check. All right now. All righty. What is happening here? Why am I freezing up? Can you all hear me out there? A lot of noise from, excuse me, just 1 second. A lot of noise from, excuse me, just 1 second. Oh, feeding back, feeding back. Oh my goodness. Oh, nothing but the finest production values here at Secret Sun Central. Alrighty. Alrighty. Nothing but the best, folks. Top-notch professionalism here at the Secret Sun Institute. Oh my goodness. Alexis is an early one. What's up, Alexis? Wiz, what's up? Or, let's see there. Andrew, I should say. David, Astrodite, Mark, Besnan, what is up? Akigini, Jimbo, Jessica, Rob, yes, yes. Good to see all y'all. Good to see all y'all. Running a little hot here. Running a little hot. And just cool that down a bit. Oh my goodness, that is getting hot. What is up with that shizzle? Well, I'll just sit back a little. I'm a loudmouth, man. I've got a big loud voice. There we go. There we go. All right. Still getting a bit of AC noise, but it was very warm. It was actually Indian summer hot out today. Really hot. Really hot. Matt, what is up? Mitch, what is up? I am so glad you're all here. This is a big one. This is a very big one. We've got a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about. Oh my goodness. It is going to be a big one. Big, 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 big. Big one. All right. Let's see here. Just check my settings. All right. We're good. All right. Filling up. Everybody checking in? Check in. Why do I keep freezing? What the hell? Can you see that on your end? Am I freezing? What? There's no draft frames. YouTube is really getting to be a problem. Seriously is. I'm not getting any drop frames, no error messages, and I keep freezing, at least on my screen. Oh, Thor at the door. What is up? What is up? What is going on tonight? Oh my goodness. The gang's all here. The gang's all here. This is great. Okay. Let me just, where are my cans? So check my levels. All right, looking good, sounding good. What's up, Janet? Glad to see you tonight. Jimbo hasn't seen Jacob's Ladder since you saw it in the theater. Do you have Prime Video? It's on Prime Video. I was just watching it today. Certain TV shows and movies are like albums to me. I never get sick of watching them. I mean, I might not watch them all the time, but they retain their power for me. And this is definitely one of them. We'll go into why. We'll go into why I watched this movie about 200 times in my life, maybe more. Oh my goodness. It is warm here tonight. I was just out with the missus and the boys, and I'll tell you something. You know, I told you, like, I just feel like I'm in a dream. I was really feeling that tonight. Under the full moon, the lighting was very weird. It was warm and windy. It was just absolutely amazing. And just I didn't want to come in. I was like, do you think I should reschedule my live stream? I was just having too nice a time out there. It was just beautiful. Oh my God. I just literally felt like I was in a dream. Very surreal. Prime Video. Yes. Definitely check it out. This is one of the greatest movies ever made, in my estimation, but we're also going to talk about how I really feel this movie had a huge influence on David Lynch. I really do. I really feel that what we associate with Lynch, you know, the timeline and the weird non sequitur kind of things and just the dreamlike atmosphere, I think he got that from this movie. I really do. Because if you look at the work he did after this, starting with Fire Walk with Me and then Lost Highway, of course, I mean, it's much different narratively than his earlier work. 29 degrees Fahrenheit. Good Lord. Oh, and I'm buffering. Seriously. What is going on here with YouTube? Really getting on my nerves. All right. And it's just, why does it keep reverting to top chat when I want it on live chat? Oh, good Lord. It is like that in Florida, FLA, Miami, FLA. Right on. Beautiful. All right, just a couple more minutes. Give people time to saunter in. I guess everybody's at, ooh, no, we got a good crowd here. I was going to say everybody's at the Halloween parties tonight. So, wow. What the hell? Sorry, I'm just looking at the dropped frames and it's fucking frozen again? What the hell? All right, you know what I'm going to do? It might be a memory issue. I'm going to try closing some stuff here. Okay. All right, I'm going to close the chat now so I can deal with this buffering issue. Unbelievable. All right, let's close this out. I am closing out the chat now, so I will open it back up later on. Okay, I'm just going to close this window. All right, we're going to get going here. We've got a lot to go through. So I'm going to get started. Jacob's Ladder, 1990, starring Tim Robbins, written by Bruce Joel Rubin and directed by Adrian Lyne. Okay, we're going to get into all the details here. This is a very iconic shot from the film. 1990, came out November 4th, 1990. All right, that was a very epical year for me. Very interesting time for this movie to come out. So Jacob's Ladder, of course, comes from the Bible. Jacob, the patriarch, lied down on the pillow on the stone and had a vision and a dream of a stairway to heaven, of the ladder, a vision ascending into heaven. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this film was originally called Dante's Inferno. Okay. And they changed the title of it, which is very, very interesting. So, again, this is in the book of Genesis. Jacob, patriarch Jacob, witnessing the skies open and the angels ascending into heaven. Now, of course, if you remember my Astronosis presentation from last year, I believe that this is what we see here. So Cepheus is God, Cepheus the gardener, the Garden of Eden, and these three constellations of Aquila, Lyra, and Cygnus are all bird constellations, okay? And I believe that these are the heavenly creatures, right? The heavenly angels, the winged creatures. But also we have serpents, kaput, which, if you remember, the name for angels is seraphim, which means burning serpents. So these winged serpents, which I believe is all a reference to the stars. Jacob, to me, is Ophiuchus, okay? And Jacob's pillow is the body of Scorpius, okay? So this is all stellar symbolism and has to do with the Milky Way ascending into the polar regions of the sky with the North Pole Polaris. And, of course, the war in heaven between God and the serpent, okay? So that is my interpretation of Jacob's Ladder. Just for reference, it doesn't really apply to the film, okay? The man on the left is Bruce Joel Rubin, a writer who I like quite a bit, and Adrian Lyne, who got his start doing perfume commercials, and then did, I think his first big film in the U.S. was Flashdance, okay? 1983. There we go, right? 1983. Very appropriate. And Bruce Joel Rubin's first big film was Brainstorm, also in 1983. So we have some serious 1983 action going on here. Just get these levels a little bit lower. All right, so these are the two men who very closely collaborated on the making of this film, okay? And we'll get into the details of that. Before writing the scripts for Jacob's Ladder, and Ghost. Mr. Rubin spent 2 years in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Nepal, just like Grant Morrison, right? I guess he wasn't contacted by any aliens, though. He had written the Afterlife-themed Brainstorm, which also has a pretty serious MK Ultra connection to it, and an earlier film called Deadly Friend. His work on Jacob's Ladder began in 1980, sparked by a nightmare in which he dreamt about being trapped in a New York City subway station. Boy, I had a lot of dreams like those myself. Rubin tried to sell the script for several years without success. He had offers from studios specializing in low-budget horror productions, but insisted on better-funded studios and directors. The script began attracting attention after being listed as one of American Film's, which is a magazine, I don't believe it's still around, top 10 unproduced screenplays. Okay, Adrian Lyne took the project. He was offered Bonfire of the Vanities, and he turned it down. He was not impressed with some of the elements of the script. He downplayed Rubin's intimidating Old Testament themes. He prepared for making the film by watching endless documentary films about the war in Vietnam and reading chronicles of near-death experiences. So I'll get a little bit of the OA here. The film's plot device of a long period of subjective time passing in an instant has been explored by several authors. A particularly strong expression for both Rubin and Lyne was Robert Enrico's 1962 short film An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, based on the Ambrose Bierce short story. One of Lynn's, Lynch, right? Yeah, it's kind of confusing, isn't it? Favorite films, which in turn was based on Ambrose Bierce's 1890 short story of the same title. Cinematographer Jeffrey L. Campbell based the film's dream sequences on the art of Francis Bacon. So they were using sort of quote-unquote transgressive art for a lot of the visuals that they used in the film. Okay. So Brainstorm, Christopher Walken, and it was actually Natalie Wood's last film. Okay. Cliff Robertson, Louise Fletcher, Douglas Trumbull. I believe the last movie that he directed, he swore he'd never directed another film after that. Maybe he did. I don't know. Ghost. Ghost is a movie that gets a very bad rap. I think it's a very good and serious movie that was sort of seen as sort of a silly rom-com, but I think it's an excellent movie. Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. Mr. Rubin also wrote Deep Impact, which came out the same year as Armageddon, which is a terrible film, and Deep Impact is a very good film. And more recently wrote a film called The Time Traveler's Wife with Eric Bana and Rachel McAdams. Okay, Eric Bana co-starred in Hannah, which some of you old school Secret Sonners will remember. Adrian Lyne, like I said, got his start doing commercials in England, and his first big film in the U.S. was Flashdance with Jennifer Beals. Huge, mega hit. Also did 9.5 Weeks, so he sort of got a reputation of doing slick, semi-soft, softcore porn, I guess you would say. Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger. And then, of course, Fatal Attraction, which was another monster hit with Michael Douglas and Glenn Close. Okay, so this guy is a hit maker, or was a hit maker. And I get sad when I look at these things. It's like, what the hell happened to our culture? It's unbelievable how far we've fallen in just 30 years. Also did Indecent Proposal, another Demi Moore picture. Woody Harrelson, Robert Redford, Billy Connolly also co-starred or appeared in that film. And then did an adaptation of Lolita, so he remade Stanley Kubrick, okay, which is a very brave thing to do, I reckon. Dominique Swain and Jeremy Irons, okay. Very controversial film, of course. A little more explicit than the Kubrick film, 30 years apart, so you would imagine there'd be some difference, okay. Jacob Slaughter spent several years in production limbo, during which several directors were attached, such as Sidney Lumet, Ridley Scott, and Michael Apted. When Bruce Joel Rubin's screenplay for Ghost went on to become a smash hit at the box office, Paramount then greenlit the film Jacob Slaughter. Adrian Lyne drew inspiration from several real-life artists. He cited the photography of Joel Peter Witkin as a major inspiration, particularly his photo Man with No Legs from 1976. Joel Peter Witkin did a lot of very disturbing kind of horror photographs with corpses and such. Very tough, very hard work to look at. Other artists Lynn credited for inspiring the film were painters Francis Bacon, Guiger, William Blake, and photographer Diane Arbus. Lynn considered several big names to play the lead: Richard Gere, Dustin Hoffman, and Al Pacino. I can see Richard Gere, but Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino, I can't see that at all. We're all interested in the role that ultimately went to Tim Robbins. Don Johnson and Mickey Rourke turned down the role, and thank God for that, because I can't imagine anyone but Tim Robbins playing this role. Lyne auditioned more than 300 women to play Jezebel, including Jennifer Lopez, who must have been very young at the time, Madonna, Demi Moore, Julia Roberts, and Andy McDonald. Oh my goodness, those names just bring back the memories. The role was ultimately awarded to the late Elizabeth Pena, the first actress to audition. I can't imagine anyone else in that role except for Elizabeth Pena. She's just absolutely phenomenal. For Jacob's son Gabriel, Macaulay Culkin was cast and not credited, which is very, very interesting. I think this was one of the first major productions that he was involved in, and he did not receive screen credit, which is very, very interesting. I think he was about 5 years old at the time, too. Hold on a sec. I just want to get in and see how we're doing. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Where are we? Where is... Oh, here I am. This was one of the hey! Oh my goodness! There we go. All right, I'm going to be checking my phone for the chat, because I want to keep those windows closed so I don't have another problem with a freeze up. So anyhow, this is just some background information on the film itself. So like I said, I am a fan of Bruce Joel Rubin's work. I actually got the book with the original screenplay. It is not great. Adrian Lyne did a lot of work on the screenplay with Bruce Joel Rubin and improved it tremendously. I kind of feel the original screenplay is a little bit dopey. It's a little bit Grand Guignol, a little bit too Hollywood. Adrian Lyne, just absolutely brilliant in how he transformed what could have been a very stupid film in the hands of many other directors into a masterpiece. So in the subway station, every ad posted on the wall is anti-drug. This was done to reinforce the theme of a drug-induced nightmare. According to Adrian Lyne, the drug themes were derived from the book Acid Dreams, the CIA, LSD, and 60s Rebellion. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So dipping into the MK Ultra realm, as this film does quite deeply. In the original script, the demonic hallucinations Jacob suffers from would have included winged beast, horned demons, cloven hoof monsters, etc. But Lyne nixed the biblical imagery for fear of them seeming too ridiculous. He said to Bruce Joel Rubin, people are just going to laugh when they see those things. And because they're just too familiar, just not scary. Lyne felt the hallucinations would be far more terrifying if they resembled human beings. This led to research on the thalidomide scandal in the 1950s. We're going to get back to that at the end. And he opted for images of physical deformities caused at birth. No computer generated imagery or optical effects were employed in this film. It's all practical. It's all camera. For the shaky heads, iconic imagery in this film, Line shot the directors at 4 frames per second. When the footage was sped up to the normal 24 frames per second, the effect appears as if they are rapidly spinning their heads. The original ending of Jacob's Ladder was different from the finished version. Rather than lying on his deathbed, Jacob was to fight Jezzy in her demonic form before ascending into heaven. And that was just dumb. It just was stupid. Like I said, when I read the screenplay, I was unimpressed, which surprised me quite a bit. So the film opens in Vietnam, and we see, some of the typical imagery that you would see in Full Metal Jacket or Apocalypse Now, the choppers and so on. This is shot in Puerto Rico, by the way. And they use very much reminiscent of Apocalypse Now, where the Puerto Rican National Guard lent them the helicopters to use. But unlike in Apocalypse Now, they didn't have to go run off and take the helicopters back to go fight communists somewhere like they did in the Philippines in Apocalypse Now. So a squadron, a platoon are all just sort of sitting around getting high, just chilling out. But things, you start to notice that things are going wrong, that people are starting to seem a little unsettled. And of course, we have Pruitt Taylor Vince, who is just brilliant at playing unsettled characters, visibly troubled characters, right? Ving Rhames from Pulp Fiction, for Pulp Fiction fans there's Ving Rhames. He starts to freak out, and then all of a sudden there is an assault, and there's a big firefight. And it's very gruesome, by the way. It's a little bit hard to watch. There's some very brutal wounds and injuries and so on in that firefight that very explicit. Yes, sir. So they're all freaking out. They're all just totally going, Viking berserker on each other, as we find out. And it gets very ugly and violent. And our friend Tim Robbins, a.k.a. Jacob Singer, splits the scene. What had happened is that everybody in the platoon was getting high and didn't realize that the dope they were smoking was laced. He was off in the woods taking a pee and didn't partake, so he was not dosed, and he goes off into the woods and has an unfortunate encounter that we'll get to in a moment, and wakes up in the subway, reading The Stranger by Albert Camus, of course. I read that in high school. I don't know why he's reading it as an adult, but very beautifully rendered. It almost seems like the same film stock that you would see in 70s film, particularly The Exorcist. There's a lot of atmosphere and vibe taken from The Exorcist in this film. Clearly a major inspiration. And particularly New York in the 70s, just ground down, grimy, gritty, depressed, industrial. Really captures that flavor. So he wakes up on the subway and realizes he's missed his stop, and talks to this woman who does not answer and gives him a very strange look. And he also sees a hobo with a tail, so he's knowing that something's wrong. And he tries to leave the subway, but it's blocked off. So he ends up crossing the tracks. Oh, there's the hell, by the way. So this is not an exercise in subtlety with the imagery here. This is what life can be. Doing drugs doesn't have to be that way. Drug hotline, hell, yes. That's what we are dealing with. a form of hell that we'll get into. And then, of course, he's almost nearly hit by a train when he's trying to cross over to get out of the station. And we see the damned descending into hell aboard the subway trains. Very, very gripping and memorable imagery here. Terrifying. So this film is not giving you any let up from the get-go. I mean, this film hits the ground running. Let's see here. Okay. So very, very terrifying. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. And of course, he sees this spectral figure at the back who waves like this. Very, very disturbing. And we see the genius of Adrian Lyne here, not opting for the corny, old, worn-out medieval imagery and going for something very new and frightening. And I believe this film still retains its visual shock power, which probably speaks to the fact that we really haven't progressed in the past 3 decades, 3.5 decades, I guess, from this film. If anything, we've regressed. This film, the imagery, it just stands up, and particularly since it's already a period piece, it's about the early 70s, and again, just really, if you've seen films like Fort Apache, The Bronx, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, again, like I said, The Exorcist, French Connection, lot of William Friedkin influence here, but really, really captures Serpico, I think, is an influence on this film, but just all that kind of dystopian early 70s New York stuff. And like I said, it almost has that same feel with the film stock. And the production is just astonishing. The production design is unbelievable. Unbelievable. So he returns home to his apartment and has the lovely and absolutely seductive and charming and delicious Elizabeth Pena, a.k.a. Jezzy, waiting for him. And we get the sense that things are not exactly what they seem, okay? There's a dog at the apartment that we kind of get the sense is Cerberus, okay? And then Jezzy shows up, and very, very beautiful and very seductive character here. As we see here the late Elizabeth Pena. Actually, a very tragic story. She had really bad drinking problem and died of cirrhosis, which is just absolutely terrible. She was very, very talented in her earlier days, and she's just absolute magic in this film. Like I said, you cannot imagine anyone else playing this role. Just really stunning and incredibly charismatic. And Jacob works at the post office, as we see here. And again, the production, the attention to detail is just astonishing. You just really believe that this is the early 70s in Brooklyn. Just absolutely amazing from start to finish, is all I can say. So this is Jacob working the post office, and Jezzy works with him. And you can see the height differential here. Tim Robbins is very, very tall, of course, and Elizabeth Pena is not. She's probably even standing on a box here. I think she was about 5 feet in heels. Tim Robbins, I think, is about 6'7", 6'6", something like that. Very tall man. But their chemistry is just phenomenal. Just like I said, cannot imagine either role going to anyone else. Particularly Tim Robbins. And one of the things that this film does is that a lot of the characters have biblical names. You know, of course, obviously Jacob and Gabriel and Jezebel and so on. And Sarah is the ex-wife of Tim Robbins' character. So very clearly, we are in the mythic realm here. It's even though the attention to detail and the realism is astonishing, we are clearly in the mythic realm, and we are, under no pretenses that we are dealing with big themes, big biblical themes, okay? And this I love. So there's Tim Robbins and Elizabeth Pena. Again, Jezebel is very seductive and sort of represents a figure of lust and seduction in his life. So there's Tim Robbins and Elizabeth Pena, which reminded me so much of Tim Robbins and Samantha Morton in Code 46, which is a film that everyone needs to see. Just absolutely amazing film, we won't even go into all the subtext in this film, but I just really got a kick of this when I was going through my screenshots here. It's like, oh, Elizabeth, Samantha, Elizabeth, Samantha, Tim Robbins. There you go. Well, hey, just a little bit of token phraseology here. Got to just throw that in. So what happens at one point is that Tim Robbins was married, had 3 kids, was divorced, and took up with Jezebel. Again, not an exercise in subtlety, but when his kids came by and dropped off photographs that the wife was getting rid of, and they're sitting there looking at all the photographs here, and again, the chemistry between these 2 actors is just astonishing. And we see a picture of Gabriel, who we find out had died before Jacob went to Vietnam. And the interesting thing is that I would guess the suggestion would be that he enlisted, because if he was married and had 3 kids, he wouldn't have been drafted for Vietnam, I don't believe. And he was also a philosophy student, so the impression that I get, even though it's never made explicit, is that he enlisted to go to Vietnam, and maybe the death of his son had something to do with that he was so stricken with guilt and grief that he went all the way across the world into a charnel house. Okay, and throughout the film, there are some unbelievably poignant and heart-wrenching flashbacks of Jacob and Gabriel, as we see here. And of course, that's Macaulay Culkin before he became a superstar. Okay. And this, first of all, those bikes, right? If you're my age and you grew up in the 70s, you know all about those bikes. This is really, it's not explicit, but heart-wrenching scene that shows when he's run over by a car while he's picking up his baseball cards, which is, we'll get into why that messed me up so bad. It messed me up and my wife really, really bad when we watched that film the first time. He has a guardian angel, Louis, the chiropractor, who appears at certain points in the film, certain decisive points in the film, and offers very sage advice. But Jacob has a bad back, and Louis treats him. Okay. Played by Danny Aiello. It doesn't get any more 80s than Danny Aiello, or early 90s, I guess, right? Danny Aiello, great actor. He's very, very good in this role. Very, very good. Very believable. So what we start to see is that Jacob is being harried and harassed by demons. I almost feel it reminds me of the Harpies in Greek myth, particularly in Jason the Argonauts, which is, of course, another one of my favorite movies of all time, big influence on my life. The way the demons are harassing him and stalking him, reminds me very much of, from Greek myth. So there's this one scene where he is walking across this bridge here and is chased. A black sedan appears out of nowhere and starts chasing him here. Okay. Now there's a double meaning here. So we see the demons, spoiler alert, there are demons driving this car, but it's also the conspiracy angle. So this is not only a supernatural thriller, this is also a conspiracy thriller, that there is a conspiracy afoot, a government conspiracy afoot. So again, this ties very much into that early 70s vibe, okay? And so these are, we see the black sedan again with actual men in it. This is, part of this conspiracy. The conspirators are driving. This obviously looks like a car that, government people would be driving, FBI or CIA in the early 70s, okay? And then, oh God, oh yeah. I mean, when the car goes by and we just see these demonic figures, and again, line doesn't go for the old, the horns and so on. It's all this body horror, I guess you would say. I mean, it's unbelievably disturbing. Still, these scenes really retain their power to shock. So Jacob's freaked out, so he goes to see his therapist in the hospital, but the therapist doesn't exist, and apparently neither does Jacob. And he has this confrontation with this very bitchy old nurse, brilliantly cast, brilliantly acted, and tells him that neither he nor this so-called therapist exist. And then there's this chase scene, and again we have a lot of these. It reminds me of Cuckoo's Nest. So there's another 70s vibe here. We have a lot of, it's like a mental hospital, and we have people who are mentally handicapped and mentally ill and so on. And we see Jacob running to get away from the cops who are chasing him. And then he goes to his shrink's office, and there's somebody else there holding this group encounter session and so on. And this gentleman in the center here tells him that his therapist was killed in a car accident. So there's, again, the undertones of conspiracy afoot here. It's very suspicious that he was chased by these demonic figures in this car and finds out that his therapist was killed in a car accident, okay? And the conspiracy is going to deepen quite a bit. So there's a party, a work party, that Jacob attends with Jesse, and it's getting pretty wild. This is, right after that scene. Jacob doesn't want to go. Jesse sort of drags him along, and it's everybody's smoking and drinking and listening to 70s funk. So it's getting pretty hot and wild in there. And Jacob finds this woman, Elsa, who is a psychic and a palm reader. And she reads his palm and tells him that he's dead. He no longer exists. So we already see the scene with the nurse where she tells Jacob that there's no record of him at this hospital that he says he's been attending regularly. And then this psychic tells him that he doesn't exist. And she's kind of flirty. It's a great scene. She's a great great performance, just perfectly rendered. Again, this entire film is flawless. I can't think of a single performance in this film that isn't just absolutely perfectly rendered. And again, the attention to detail, the production, costume, soundtrack, lighting, film stock, everything is just absolutely brilliant. So Jacob is told that he is dead, okay, and the tension just continues to grow throughout the scene. We see him become more and more distressed. And one of the reasons that he's seeing figures like this, I think you'd be pretty distressed. This particular character, or this figure that we see in the film, is inspired by that photographer who I mentioned just before. And this is dark, heavy stuff. And he's seeing all this kind of stuff happen, and he's starting to not do so well. He's starting to freak out for obvious reasons. And he's seeing these demons sort of snapping at him, these demon teeth, or this mouth, or, I mean, it's all very quickly cut, and you can't really see what exactly is attacking him. And of course he freaks out. He's starting to freak out. Things are getting really dark, and they play Lady Marmalade by Patti LaBelle, Nona Hendrix, of course. And then they play My Thang by James Brown. And things are getting very dark and scary. Again, this is not for the faint of heart. And Jezzy is dancing with some rando. And she's getting wild. She's like kind of straddling this guy and rubbing her crotch against his thigh, and things are getting really heavy. And Jacob sees her, he sees that this man that she's dancing with becomes this winged demon, and he is not happy. And there's Jezzy there, and she's like in this orgasmic thrall while she's dancing along to this James Brown track with this winged demon. Oh my God, this is just so brilliant. So amazing, so dark. And again, the James Brown song, is from an album called Hell. So it seems that the song was chosen for that little bit of extra frisson there. The James Brown album Hell. The song is called My Thang. Very aggressive funk song. And then all of a sudden, this horn just appears out of Jezzy's mouth, and Jacob just starts screaming and falling down, and he passes out. And we get back to his apartment, and Jezzy's like, "Oh, I've never been so embarrassed in all my life. He humiliated me in front of all my friends and our co-workers and so on." But then she discovers that he's very, very sick. It has a 106-degree temperature. And that is like, that becomes like this huge crisis. And they call the doctor, and it's like, you better get him cooled down or he's going to die. And when I was watching that, I was thinking, I had 106-degree temperatures all the time when I was a kid. 105, 106. I don't know how I survived. Maybe that's, maybe my brains got cooked or something. I don't know. So they put him in an ice bath. The neighbors all come by, and, just real typical Brooklyn guy there, and the wife beater and so on. And Jezzy runs around, and she's like, "I need ice. We got to collect ice and so on." And we put him in the bath, and he's freaking out. He's got a 106-degree temperature. That's not where you don't want to be in an ice bath when you're feeling that way. And he's screaming and shaking and so on. He's like, "Stop it, you're killing me." Yeah. It's interesting too, because I only remember it a few times when my mother would put me in a bath when I was getting really bad fevers. Only like 2 or 3 times. I don't know. Maybe she wanted me to die. I don't know. And then there's this rapid change of scene. Very Lynchian. And Jacob is back with his wife Sarah in bed in their apartment in Brooklyn. And he wants to shut the window because it's cold. His wife likes to have the window open. It helps her to sleep better and so on. He's freezing cold, and it's very disorienting because we're phasing between all these realities that are rendered utter realism. Okay? Sometimes with Lynch, it's like when you're going from reality to reality, the way it's rendered is a little bit more surreal, a little bit more dreamy. In this film, stark, pure realism. All right? And he tells her that he had this nightmare that he was living with this woman from work, Jezzy, and she's like, "Oh, that's your guilty conscience," and so on. It's very, typical kind of married couple pillow talk. Very, very well written, very well rendered, just absolutely beautiful and convincing. Yeah, and then Gabriel shows up and he's like, wants to know what's going on, and what's all the noise and what's all the ruckus. This is the son, of course, who's killed, and it's incredibly poignant. And Jacob puts him back to bed, and Jacob says, "Don't go," which me and my wife just both fell apart at the same, because our son, when we would put him to bed, he had this whole thing where, lie down, close your eyes. Just always wanted. And the reason why this was so upsetting to us is that my son, at that point in time, looked exactly like Macaulay Culkin. This is my son on the right. He looks a little, he's a little older here. I think he's about 9 here, because there's Mr. Bones. We got Mr. Bones for Christmas. So I think my son is about 9. So he's a little older, but I think you can see the resemblance. Son, like Macaulay Culkin, is those kind of sleepy eyelids. So, yeah, that was tough. That was very emotional to watch. We both just totally fell apart, because it just was way too real. Way too real. Like I said, my son, I guess when we watched this film, was about 3.5, and looked uncannily like Macaulay Culkin. So there you go. And then Jacob wakes up, and his doctor is there, tells him, he must have friends upstairs. Doctor's played by Louis Black, by the way. Some of you might remember from The Daily Show. This is just an absolutely iconic shot. I think this is probably one of the, most emblematic shots from the film. Yeah. But then there's a Vietnam flashback, and we see these interspersed through the film. And again, we don't know what is real, because we have the reality with Jezebel, and then we have the reality with the wife, Sarah, and the kids, and then we have all the flashbacks with Gabriel, and then we have all these scenes from Vietnam. And we're not really ever told, or, we have to figure out for ourselves which reality Jacob is actually living in. Again, very David Lynch, but I think even more unsettling. Okay? So, say a film like Lost Highway, or Mulholland Drive, it's sort of like this, it's like half and half. Like there's half is one reality and half is another reality. Okay, both those films. I guess this would be more like what Lynch does in Inland Empire. Again, I really get the very strong sense that Lynch was very, very heavily influenced by this film. I think this really made a huge impression on him. And again, I think the proof is in the pudding. And then, of course, he's being lifted into the medevac. And the thing that you realize is that when you see all these spinning heads and so on, what he's actually processing is the sound of the helicopter rotors and so on. And that's why we see these spinning heads and all this kind of stuff, as we'll discuss when we get to the conclusion of the film. So we're back in the Jezebel reality, let's just call it the Brooklyn reality. He's recovering from his fever, and he's got all these books on witchcraft and demonology because he's really believing that he is being stalked by demons. So he's had several different encounters now with demons, and it because he has this philosophy and this studious background, he goes, this of course is Paradise Lost, Dante. No, not Paradise. Paradise Lost is Milton. The Inferno. So he's trying to figure out what exactly is happening to him. And Jesse is getting a little impatient with him, because he's just sort of sitting around. He's not going to work. He's not doing anything. He's just sort of moping around the apartment and looking at these creepy old books and so on. And then we see this scene where she sort of confronts him. And this gif here doesn't have, her eyes go black, so she's clearly a demon. She's just another demon. This is, sort of a false reality that he's immersed in. Again, very, very unsettling and disturbing. And then he gets a call from his old friend Paul, again, Pruitt Taylor Vince, who tells him that he's going to hell and that he's being attacked, he's being stalked by demons and so on, and he's carrying around a crucifix and a Bible and, all these sort of amulets and so on, and nothing seems to be helping. And Jacob tells him that he knows what he's talking about. He sees these demons too. He's having the same experience, that he feels like he's going to hell. And what this really reminded me of, just as an aside, is I remember having a conversation with Tracy Twyman about a year before she died, where she told me that she felt that we all died and went to hell in 2012. So a little bit of extra friction there, okay? Unfortunately, Paul has a mishap with a car bomb, right? So again, the conspiracy angle. So you don't know what to believe. We have the Vietnam angle. We have the storyline with Sarah, and then the storyline with Jezebel. Now, we're given to believe that the Jezebel storyline, living in the apartment with Jezebel and so on, is reality, and that the scenes with Sarah and the kids and so on are flashbacks, as are the Vietnam things. So what we are in is that we are in a conspiracy thriller. It has psychedelic or spiritual or supernatural elements because there's the whole, what we saw in the very first scene, in the opening scenes, is that, everybody's sort of on drugs and is affected by the drugs and everything. So what we are given to believe is that this is all about a cover-up of a drug test in Vietnam, which were not unknown. And this strange figure comes up. This is Michael Newman, the character's name, not the actor's name, who's been sort of stalking, and we see him in the background from scene to scene, and he helps Jacob up and then runs off. We'll see him again later on in the picture, but there you have it. So Paul is no more, okay? So they get together for Paul's funeral, the old platoon, right? And they're all just sitting around and talking about demons, and Paul was seeing demons, and a number of these other veterans are like, yeah, well, I'm kind of having the same experience, and all this kind of thing. And they agree that something needs to be done, that something happened to them in Vietnam, and something needs to be done about it, okay? So they go to see George Costanza. Yeah, so I this is before, well, I guess, when did Seinfeld start? I think maybe the Seinfeld Chronicles was like, I hadn't been watching Seinfeld, so I didn't really know anything about Jason Alexander. This is the first time I'd ever seen him. And of course there's Ving Rhames again, and he plays this kind of sleazy lawyer. Look at that tie. God, that's so 70s. He plays this sleazy lawyer, but he, agrees to take on their case after they give them the old sad puppy dog routine. But shortly after, Jacob discovers that the other men in the platoon have been threatened and drop the case, and he goes to confront the lawyer, George Costanza, of course, and he gets very angry and says he talked to the army and said that they're all mental patients and they never went to Vietnam and so on. And he's very outraged by it. And Jacob, the height differential here is just really, really funny, because Jacob is, Tim Robbins is halfway down the stairs and he's still towering over Jason Alexander here. So kind of amusing. Some of these actors can get very, very small. I had seen Seinfeld do a, it wasn't too long before this movie was released. When was it? It was September 1990, I believe. I had gone out to Disney, to Burbank, and we went to the Improv to see a bunch of comedians, and Jerry Seinfeld did a set there, and he was okay. He was pretty funny. There were a couple comedians that were much, much funnier than him. One was a guy named Monty Hoffman, and another guy was a guy named Hugh Fink. And I swear to God, I thought I was going to have an aneurysm. I was laughing so hard. But Jerry was there with a very beautiful woman, but he was like maybe 5'8", 5'9", and you see when you see in Seinfeld, he's much. Jason Alexander is going to be like 5'2" or something. But one thing because I was standing I was in the lobby and I was standing right next to Jerry Seinfeld, and I kind of towered over him, and he was kind of looking at me like sort of like out of this, give me a little bit of side eye, because he thought like, why is this 6'4" guy kind of like just standing over me here? But I remember he drove up and he had this like replica of like an old roadster, like an old 20s roadster too. But again, he was pretty funny. But there were other comedians that were measurably more funny than he was. But anyway, that's my Jerry Seinfeld story. Anyway, George Costanza, yes. So then he gives him the old heave ho, and gets ugly. But when Jacob gets outside the courthouse, he's nabbed by these two thugs. And again, they throw him in the black sedan and tell him, he's got to keep his mouth shut about the army and all this kind of stuff. So we're just square in classic 70s conspiracy thriller mode here. Again, these two guys, big Italian guy, big Irish guy, they throw him in this black sedan and they start giving him the business, the old third degree, tell him to keep his mouth shut and everything like that. And Jacob kicks out the window of the sedan, ends up going ass over tea kettle onto the street. And since he's got the bad back, he's laid out and he's done for. He's paralyzed. And there's this like sleazy Santa, give to the needy. And it comes over, you poor man, and like steals his wallet. So Jacob then ends up in the emergency room and tells him that he was robbed by Santa Claus. And the doctors are all kind of like, oh, what the hell's this guy on about? But then there's this very sudden and unsettling and disorienting tone shift where he's being taken down by these two orderlies on the stretcher, basically to hell. He's taken to another building, sort of a building off the main hospital, and it just the descent into hell. And we see these poor, deformed people all over the place. We see body parts, blood. It is just grim and gruesome as it gets. I mean, this is just pure, straight-up horror. No chaser. This is as brutal as it gets, okay? And again, these people are real people who had thalidomide-induced birth defects, okay? Let me see here. This is not an easy film to watch. This is a very grim and dark and disturbing movie. And this scene in particular is rough. Very, very rough. Okay? And there's, again, the spinning heads. Yeah. Adrian Lyne is just an absolute genius. So many of the techniques that he developed for this film have been used in countless other films. All right, we'll get into that in a bit. But this is very rough, very rough, very hard to watch. And he ends up in this operating theater, and the doctor is just telling him that he's dead. And, he's like, I want to go home. And the doctor says, this is your home, you're dead. And he's in this sort of contraption for, people with spinal injuries and so on. And Jezebel is there as a nurse, and she's just completely disinterested in his plight and so on. There he is, chained up. Again, this is, but this is another tonal shift because this, how do I explain this? There are certain 70s films, and Oliver Stone sort of touched on this in the Doors film, in the scene when Jim Morrison has left the Doors, and it's morning. Like, it's very hard to describe because, it's clearly morning. And we're in yet another reality. This is a new reality now. This is hell. We've seen Jacob in what we thought was reality being tormented by demons, and now he is in hell. This is hell now. He descended into hell. The descent into the underworld, okay? And then we see this rather grim and hideous anesthetician with this giant syringe and injects him directly into the pineal gland, the third eye. So we get this third eye injection. So what is that symbolism about, right? So he's in hell, and he's his third eye is either being destroyed or being activated. Which is it? So then he's in recovery, and we're led to believe that the hell situation, the descent into hell, was a dream. And then all of a sudden, Sarah and his 2 boys are there. Okay, so which reality are we in now? Okay, she's there again. Again, we have these shifts, but they are divorced. They are divorced. But we're almost led to believe that the Sarah and the boys are almost like hallucinations themselves, and then they sort of enter in this other timeline that we are led to believe in this film is reality. And she's very loving, very kind, and very sympathetic. Unlike Jezebel, who is harsh and judgmental and angry with him. Okay. So this is just a very sweet scene, very touching, and you can still see that these characters love each other quite a bit. Very, very, very emotional. And then Louis shows up and sees Jacob in all this equipment, right? He's in traction and so on, and he's like, "This is barbaric. What is this, the Middle Ages?" and all this kind of thing. So, yeah, he's rescuing. Because what we're led to believe ultimately is that Jacob is still in hell, that the hospital is hell. Okay, that even though he's not in the depths of hell, that he's still in hell, and maybe a higher level of hell, and that the Denny Aiello character Louis is clearly his guardian angel. I mean, very, very explicitly his guardian angel, as we'll see shortly soon. Okay, where's my chat go? Give me just a second here. All right, so here we go. Here we go. Here we are. I'm just was involved in. There we go. What is? I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. What is the delay here? Give me just a second here, because this says 49 minutes. Okay. Well, Louis is here, and he is the guardian angel. Give me just a second here. Forgive me. I just, I'm having the usual issues because give me just a second here. Excuse me just one moment. I'm just trying to see what the okay, so we're there. Let's just see where the chat is at. Make sure that everybody is all right. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, we're on track. Sorry about that. So Lou comes in, rescues him, takes him back to his office. Right. Gives him the old heave ho. It's really interesting too, because I started seeing a chiropractor at the same time. Deborah Cruz, my beautiful Mexican chiropractor, who looked exactly, uncannily like Roby from Friday the 13th, the series. So she was kind of my Louis meets my Jezebel. So it gives him the real big twist of the old neck. I hated those neck things. I always thought I was going to just hated that. That was my least favorite part of going to the chiropractor. But back in Vietnam, and then we see he's messed up. He's in the medevac chopper, and they're taking fire, and things are not going well. So which is this? Is this a flashback? Which reality are we in? Throughout the entire film until the end, we're really led to believe that this is all flashback. Okay, but maybe it isn't. So let's get into the MK Ultra aspect of this, because this is a major part of this story. So Michael shows up again. Jacob goes back to his apartment. Jesse's like, where have you been? I've been worried sick about you. He said he was in the hospital. And she's like, which hospital? I called them all, blah, 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 blah. And then he gets a phone call from Michael Newman, and he wants to meet. Jacob is told by Michael that the horrific events he experienced on his final day in Vietnam were the product of an experimental drug called the latter, BZ, which is an actual real compound. The latter is a fake name, but anyhow, which was used on troops without their knowledge. At the end of the film, a message is displayed saying that reports of testing of BZ, NATO code for deliriant and hallucinogen known as 3-quinacidyl benzylate, on U.S. soldiers during the Vietnam War were denied by the Pentagon. Line said a part of the inspiration for his motif was, again, Martin A. Lee's book, Acid Dreams, the CIA, LSD, and 60s Rebellion, but noted nothing in the book suggests that the drug BZ, a super hallucinogen that has a tendency to elicit manic behavior, was used on U.S. troops. According to Line's audio commentary, test screenings indicated the initial version of the film was overwhelming for the audience. In response, about 20 minutes of disturbing scenes were removed from the final cut. We'll get into some of those, because a lot of them deal with BZ and the drug testing and scenes with Michael. Okay. So this scene is actually in the film. They're sort of in this alleyway, and Michael tells them that he was a sort of hippie drug chemist who got busted and was sent to Vietnam to develop chemical compounds for the army, and that he was witness to some horrific testing with captured VC and so on, and that they had tested it on this platoon that Jacob was part of because the army was afraid they were getting soft and were losing their killer instincts and so on. And that the firefight that we see in the beginning of the film was actually the platoon attacking themselves. It was them all just freaking out and attacking each other. All right. And this is a photograph from Edgewood Arsenal, where Andrew Paharich, of course, came from. This is MK Ultra testing with various psychedelic compounds that they tested on military personnel. We see a sergeant here being tested on, and so on. This is a very dark and horrific period of American history. Okay. This is from the outtakes. Michael takes Jacob to his hotel on West 13th Street. Oh, there we go. And, we see this shot here with this cracked mirror, and Adrian Lyne says this is an indication that things are not what they seem, and that, this is almost like a sacrament. This is almost like communion. Michael says that he can cure Jacob's psychosis, that the experiences that he's having with demons and so on is a result of this drug, that the drug has lingered in his system and is creating these psychotic breaks, and says that, he will give him the antidote and so on. And this is all very deliberately religiously tinged. Okay. Just get rid of this page here. So this very horrific bad trip scene results from this experience. Jacob experiences this really terrifying horror show that has this weird meat demon, this formless, shapeless creature bursting from the ceiling and so on. But we're led to believe, in the context of the scene, again, this was cut from the final film, and I usually believe with these scenes that are cut from these films, that this was a very easily justifiable cut. I don't think the scene adds anything to the story. I don't think the dialogue is particularly crisp. I think that this was, very justifiably cut from the final film, and is not missed whatsoever. And I remember when this footage first hit YouTube, I remember being like incredibly unimpressed with it. There's another scene when he's trying to get a train to Chicago and so on, and he's got these, these sort of creepy mafioso government or whatever, just thugs sort of chasing him, and he ends up in the bathroom, and apparently this footage, I don't believe the footage has been released, but some man was being raped in a bathroom stall and everything. Again, these scenes just add nothing to the story at all. I think if they were left in, this would have been a much lesser film. Very similar to the scenes that were cut from Apocalypse Now, and were put in for the special edition, which I hated, because all the scenes that were put back in, we saw in Hearts of Darkness, where Francis Ford Coppola was saying, these scenes are terrible, they don't work, I'm cutting this, they were put back in and they were bad, and they really diminished my experience of the film. That's another film I watched several times. And this is another outtake where Jacob is confronted by Jezebel in her demonic form at his apartment, his old apartment with Sarah, and this adds absolutely nothing. It's very dumb, and apparently in the original screenplay format it was even dumber. This was another very judicious cut. Just did not work, did not add anything to the story, was not needed, was not helpful. I'm just putting it in because I just wanted to sort of give you the whole overview. But the deleted scenes add nothing to the story whatsoever. In the final cut of the film, we see Jacob take a taxi back to his old apartment, the apartment that he had with Sarah and the boys. He's greeted by the doorman, which very much feels like, Sharon at the River Styx and so on. I mean, this whole thing just really has that very mythic, biblical, eternal, archetypal quality to it. Okay, so Jacob ends up back at his old apartment, and he's just sitting there and hearing voices and such, and then Gabriel reappears. Oh, yeah. And takes him up the stairway. Stairway to heaven. Stairway to heaven. Very beautiful, touching scene. And anytime Macaulay Culkin showed up on screen, my wife and I were just like, just absolute. Because, again, he just looked exactly like my son at that age. Now, of course, Gabriel we see in several books of the Bible and extra biblical books. Gabriel is very much an interlocutor between man and God and so on. So the fact that Gabriel takes Jacob up to heaven is, very appropriate archetypally. And then we take another tonal shift, and we're in this MASH hospital, and these two doctors, saying, call it, he's done for, he's over. But we see him with a smile on his face, because he's made peace. So this whole experience that he was going through was, on a different realm. So very similar to Lynch on Lost Highway, on Mulholland Drive, on Inland Empire, all very similar. This is, well, let's get into it. I don't want to say it's all a dream because it's much more complex than that, but this was his descent into purgatory. Okay, purgatory. And the film ends with this card, again, talking about the hallucinogenic drug BZ that was used in experiments on soldiers during the Vietnam War. The Pentagon doesn't write the story. Maybe if they didn't use I'm sure they're using plenty of other things. Another story that you might have heard me talk about, but one night back in the 90s, we went to this illegal sort of speakeasy that was all Marine veterans. And it was just this basement bar that was frequented by Marines. And this is when I sort of discovered that, hey, people do things in secret. People get together and go to secret places and do things in secret. Everything isn't plastered all over the internet or the newspapers and so on. But the one thing I do remember, and you probably heard me talk about it before, is that the guy who had invited us was a friend of my sister-in-law's, and he was showing us this poster with all this slang and lingo from the Vietnam War. And he got to Operation Phoenix, and I don't think he knew what it was. And all of a sudden there's this guy as tall as me, maybe a little taller, looked like Thor, had been through hell. I mean, big Viking-looking guy, ruddy face, clearly deeply disturbed. Starts talking about Operation Phoenix in a very emphatic and unsettling way, and clearly he was involved in it. Operation Phoenix was basically a very dark intelligence program with assassinations and murders and bombings and just horrific kind of dirty war stuff. And this guy who literally appeared out of nowhere. I didn't know this place wasn't that big. I mean, there's probably only maybe 50 people in this place. He just kind of comes out of nowhere and is very disturbed and starts going on about Operation Phoenix. Probably was exposed to some rather exotic dopamine agonists, let's just say. That was a real experience for me. But of course, this is a few years after I'd seen the film, so. But that really stuck with me. Vietnam was a horrific war, a completely horrific and unnecessary war, and I think destroyed this country. I really feel that. I feel that Vietnam destroyed this country. I think that this country was never the same after Vietnam, and it never really truly recovered from that. Unfortunately, I think it just ripped the soul out of this country. It was a completely unnecessary war that exposed too many people to too many horrific things. Vietnamese are very tough people, have been fighting for a very long time, and knew how to terrorize and to wage war in ways that traumatized a lot of people. Again, just stupid, horrible war. I mean, all of that, the whole Southeast Asia thing, Cambodia and Laos, the bombings, napalm, Agent Orange, it was all horrific and destroyed. just completely destroyed the soul of this country. And this is why I think that another reason why I think Jacob's Ladder is such a powerful film, because it really captures, it doesn't directly address all of that, but I think you experience it. You experience, what transpired. Okay, we've got a lot more to go through, so let me just, sorry for all these little tangents. Purgatorio. Purgatorio. So this is explicitly spelled out with Louis in the film, okay, that we are dealing with purgatory. All right, purgatory. And purgatory is an old, I believe it's almost exclusively Catholic belief. And let's get into that. So Louis tells Jacob about purgatory, and he quotes Meister Eckhart, who I remember reading about quite a bit in the 90s when I was in that phase, okay, which I kind of feel like I'm going to return to, but, that's neither here nor there. This just delving into this film kind of like brings up a lot of this old stuff and reminds me of a lot of these things that I was into in the 90s, Meister Eckhart being one of them. And I'm not sure this is a direct quote, and I couldn't actually find a direct quote, but this is presented as a direct quote from Eckhart, but this is pretty much dead on for what Louis, the guardian angel, says. The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life. Your memories, your attachments, they all burn away. But they're not punishing you. They're freeing your soul. If you're frightened of dying and holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. If you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the earth. Now that's credited to Meister Eckhart. I'm sure, I kind of think that that's a very loose paraphrasing, but it's very consistent with the things that Meister Eckhart would say. Meister Eckhart, born Johannes Eckhart, 1260 in Hockheim, Germany, Dominican theologian and writer who is the greatest German speculative mystic. In the transcripts of his sermons in German and Latin, he charts the course of union between the individual soul and God. Although Eckhart's philosophy amalgamates Greek, Neoplatonic, Arabic, and scholastic elements, it is unique. His doctrine, sometimes abstruse, always arises from one simple personal mystical experience to which he gives a number of names. By doing so, he was also an innovator of the German language, contributing many abstract terms. In the second half, like Fahrvergnügen, I guess. No, just kidding. In the second half of the 20th century, there was great interest in Eckhart among some Marxist theorists and Zen Buddhists. Yes, Eckhart is very, very similar to Zen in many, many ways. I remember I was very interested in Zen Buddhism in the 80s, and it was a very easy transition into reading Eckhart, okay, because it was very much along the same lines, very much about disattachment and disattaching from disattachment, right? It's something that I think about quite a bit, all right? I still process, things that I read in Zen and Eckhart, where, letting go of, when I talk about naming and claiming and resisting the urge to name and claim, resisting the urge to control mystical experience, that's pure Eckhart, okay? That's definitely the influence that Eckhart had on me. So the Catholic Church's teaching on purgatory, the cleansing fire that prepares the elect for heaven, can be difficult to understand. But for one saint, the Catholic, and the saint being Saint Nicholas of Tolentino, the Catholic imperative to pray for the dead was made very real to him. According to the story, one of his deceased friends appeared to him asking him for prayers. Though such an explicit apparition likely will not happen for most, Catholics can still draw inspiration from the holy example of the Saint Nicholas of Tolentino, not Tarantino, that's Quentin of Tarantino, whose feast day the Church celebrates on September 10th, the first day of the X-Files. Getting back, you remember the Santa Claus thing, I wonder if that was sort of a little in-joke to Saint Nicholas of Tolentino. Not the same St. Nicholas that inspired Santa Claus, but maybe a little bit of an in-joke for, theology students, I guess. This is St. Catherine of Genoa, okay? This is from a book called Essential Writings of Christian Mysticism. God is so pure, far more than one can imagine, that should a soul see it in itself even the least mote of imperfection, it would rather cast itself into 1,000 hells than go into that spot in the presence of the divine majesty. Therefore, seeing that purgatory is ordained to take away such blemishes, it plunges into it and deems it a great mercy that can thus remove them. The whole idea of the cleansing fire, too, I mean, we see this in alchemy, right? The whole idea of burning away impurities is very much part of the alchemical process. And I really do wonder sometimes. I remember Jazz Coleman said that, he believed that this whole idea of the inferno and hell and purgatory and stuff was part of the alchemical process, burning away impurities. No tongue can express, no mind can understand how dreadful purgatory is. Its pain is like that of hell, and yet, as I have said, I see any soul with the least stain of imperfection accept it as a mercy, not thinking of it at any moment when compared with being kept from its love. It appears that the greatest pain the souls in purgatory endure proceeds from their being sensible of something in themselves displeasing to God, and that it has voluntarily done against so much goodness. Let me repeat that. And that has been done voluntarily against so much goodness for being in the state of grace. They know the truth, and they know how grievous is any obstacle that does not let them approach God. So again, I mean, the whole idea that we're seeing in the doctrine of purgatory, and as well is explicitly in Jacob's Ladder, is the whole idea of burning away impurities, burning away your attachments to life, burning away your attachments to the past, burning away your attachments to the material world, so that you can ascend, to the Godhead. Okay. But there's another big element in this. Oh, I just want to. This is a meme from As Quotes. If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough. And that's from Eckhart. And that's the attitude of gratitude. I think that is a beautiful little maxim. Very inspiring. Just thank you. Attitude of gratitude. Every day. Now, aside from Eckhart and Christian mysticism, Jacob's Ladder is very much drawing on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a.k.a. Bardo Thodol, which is also the title of a Millennium episode. So let's get into sort of the Buddhist aspects of this. And remember that Bruce Joel Rubin was in a Buddhist monastery in Nepal before he wrote this film. So there's clearly a lot of influence there. In some schools of Buddhism, Bardo, is a transitional or liminal state between death and rebirth. The concept arose soon after Gautama Buddha's death, with some schools accepting the existence of such an intermediate state, while other schools rejected it. Buddhists expanded the Bardo concept to 6 or more states of consciousness, covering every stage of life and death. In Tibetan Buddhism, Bardo is the central theme of the Bardo Thodol, literally liberation through hearing during the intermediate state. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, a text intended to both guide the recently deceased person through the death bardo to gain a better rebirth, and also to help their loved ones with the grieving process. So how interesting that, we have the Tibetan Book of the Dead reminding us also of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So the doctrine of souls and the afterlife, I tend to lean more towards the Buddhist idea of rebirth, reincarnation, and so on, than I would a more traditional Catholic idea of, one shot, afterlife, heaven or hell. I see everything as cyclical. I see nature as cyclical. But there are probably some heterodox or unorthodox Christian mystics that believe that as well. And I don't believe that there's anything particularly in the Bible that contradicts that. And I think that reincarnation, particularly in the Gospels, is implied, particularly when the apostles believe that that Christ is Moses or Elijah, and so on and so forth. And then there's also, the scene at the mountain with Elijah and Moses. I mean, I think that I think doctrines against reincarnation in Christianity, how do I put this? I think they're probably more politically motivated. I think that the actual text in the Gospels particularly is a bit more ambiguous on the matter, but that is not a topic for this discussion. We're talking about a movie. There was considerable dispute over this theory of the bardo during the early centuries of Buddhism, with one side arguing that rebirth or conception follows immediately after death, the other one saying there must be an interval between the two. With the rise of Mahayana, belief in a transitional period prevailed, Mahayana Buddhism. Later Buddhism expanded the whole concept to distinguish 6 or more similar states, covering the whole cycle of life, death, and rebirth. But it can also be interpreted as any transitional experience, any state that lies between 2 other states. Liminality, right? So, rather than just a dream, right? Just a dream, we're seeing in Jacob's Ladder both depictions of purgatory and also the bardo. And are they contradictory? Are they necessarily at odds? I don't believe so. I really don't. Its original meaning, the experience of being between death and rebirth, is the prototype of the bardo experience, while the 6 traditional bardos show how the essential qualities of that experience are also present in other transitional periods. By refining even further the understanding of the essence of bardo, it can then be applied to any moment of existence. The present moment now is a continual bardo, always suspended between the past and the future. So I'm just thinking about David Bowie. What is it? In Quicksand, the next bardo. Anyhow. So, as mentioned before, so this is, a major influence. So we have the doctrine of purgatory. We have the doctrine of the bardo from Buddhism, okay? And also this occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce. Now, this is from a French short film that was redubbed and included as the very last produced episode of The Twilight Zone. Okay, so this is towards the end of the 5th season, when the show is kind of on its last legs, and they aired this adaptation of Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is, very Twilight Zone in and of itself. Okay, let me just read you this quick synopsis here. Union troops prepare a prisoner, Peyton Farquhar, for death by hanging from a railroad bridge. As the rope is adjusted around his neck, a vision of his home and family flashes before him. As he falls, the rope breaks and he drops into a river. He frees himself from his bonds, kicks his boots free, and swims downstream as soldiers fire at him. He is swept through rapids and crawls ashore, exhausted but laughing with relief. A distant cannon shot sends him running through a forest, then along a linear and orderly lane. Finally arriving at the gates of his home, he pushes his way through foliage. He reaches open lawn and runs towards his wife, who is smiling and weeping. Just as the couple are about to fall into each other's arms, Farquhar, stiffens and gasps, and his head snaps back. The scene cuts back to his body hanging from the bridge. His entire escape and reunion with his wife revealed to be an illusion experienced at the moment of the drop. Yes, as I said before, the film was shown on American television as an episode of the 5th season of the fantasy science fiction show The Twilight Zone. Producer William Frug had seen the film and decided to buy the American broadcast rights. Yes, Ambrose Bierce. Very influential short storyteller. Now, there's a lot of articles, I guess sort of clickbaity articles. This one claimed that there was a Lovecraft influence. I don't believe that, but I just wanted to include this just as a little bit of data points here. Tim Robin plays a struggling Vietnam veteran in the surrealistic nightmare of a film, blah, 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 blah. We go through that. The distinction between reality and fantasy vanishes as Jacob plunges deeper into madness. Jacob's Ladder is an original horror film full of homages to Lovecraft. Doubtful. But I am willing to be persuaded otherwise, okay? Of course, The X-Files. Chris Carter, very, very clearly obsessed with this film throughout the entire corpus, right up to the very end. The scene where the doctor tells him that his usual therapist has been killed in a car accident was replayed in the Erlenmeyer flask when Scully is consulting with Dr. Carpenter about the alien virus. So that's... I'm sure there are other earlier examples of this in The X-Files, but this is just the first one that came to mind. Prue Taylor-Vince appeared in an episode called Unruh, which is a fantastic episode that everybody needs to watch. He is absolutely brilliant in it. So good. David and Julian are amazing in it as well. He plays a serial killer. Just absolutely brilliant. Amazing. The doctor in the hell operating room with the sealed up eyes very clearly inspired the rebel aliens who seal up their orifices to protect them from the black oil. Very clear homage there. Another clear homage between Jacob's Ladder and the Sixth Extinction Amor Fati, which also has elements of The Last Temptation of Christ, but also an episode of The Invaders called The Innocent, okay, when Mulder is being operated on. Clearly drawing on that. After The X-Files, the first run of The X-Files, Chris Carter did a pilot for a series he intended to base on Dante's Inferno, just as the original title of Jacob's Ladder. And the end of the pilot has very terrifying, very Jacob's Ladder worthy demons appear out of nowhere. Very shocking, and kind of almost worth watching the pilot just for that ending. In my struggle, in the rather not good 10th season, back in 2016, Annette Mahendru, gosh, does she look like a ringer for Elizabeth Pena or what? Yes. And they even have like a very, very similar voice. It's kind of unsettling. Her speaking voice is very similar to Elizabeth Pena. They both have that kind of husky voice. Both very petite, unconventionally attractive, but incredibly sensual and sexy brunettes. I'm sure that Chris Carter was processing Elizabeth Pena with that casting. And of course, William, the whole summation of the series, Mulder and Scully's son, who is pretty much a demon himself, right? And that's sort of the irony of the whole series, is that all their fighting produced the scariest monster that anyone would ever face, played by Miles Robbins, the son of Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon. Now, I'll just tell you this real quick. You might have heard me tell you this story before, but me and my stories, right? I remember I was in New York late one night. I was coming down 6th Avenue to go to the PAL station. And I'm coming down 6th Avenue, and I think it was I guess it must have been 10th Street, right? And Susan Sarandon is there with a brood, and she's carrying who I assume to be Miles Robin when he was a baby. And I remember she kind of looked at me like, please help me, because she had all these kids. And to this day, I feel guilty that I didn't, because she was kind of looking at me like, please help me. I'm just totally overwhelmed with this. And I just remember thinking, I was just so shocked that I literally ran into Susan Sarandon and this brood of kids that I kind of froze. I'm just like, what the hell? And I just, I kind of just ran off to the power station. But I feel guilty to this day. Because I was always like, I always made it a point whenever I saw like, a woman struggling with a baby carriage on the subway or something, or anytime I could sort of be an angel, just give somebody a moment of grace. I always tried to take it. I always wanted to be like somebody's temporary guardian angel, just because it sort of fed the soul, right? And I feel guilty to this day that I did not help Susan Sarandon. And I was like, well, doesn't she have like a nanny or, I don't know, whatever. Also, since we just talked about Billy Connolly, I remember being in a boutique on Melrose Avenue back in 1990 when he was on Head of the Class. And he came in like with his wife and a bunch of little kids and another woman. These two attractive blonde women and a bunch of little kids. And he was being like a loud asshole, It was like he just was being a douche. Anyhow. And of course, the whole thing with occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge was very much part of the cliffhanger of the 10th season when they're on the bridge and the Mulder is dying and Scully needs to get him stem cells from Miles Robbins, Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon's son, and then it ends, and everybody was pissed. People were pissed. I thought the whole season was pretty lousy, and that was like the only season that I felt. The only scene that I really felt like kind of lived up to the X-Files. Maybe in the first episode as well. But that was the only scene where I was like, oh yeah, I'm watching the X-Files again, and not this like bizarre imposter. And then, like I said, it was all sort of this vision that Scully had been receiving from William telepathically and so on. That sort of became a through line throughout this 11th season, which is actually much, much better than the 10th season. Definitely not up to par, and I blame a lot of that on Gillian Anderson, whose performances are rather terrible throughout the entire 10th and 11th season. Another story for another day. But also in the 11th season, I think they kind of said, well, if we're really going to just do our flat-out remake of Jacob's Ladder, this is our last chance. They did an episode called Kitten with Skinner, and it was just flat out. It was just basically X-Files doing Jacob's Ladder. It starts off in Vietnam, and it's got the whole thing with MK Naomi and the psychedelic gas and blah 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 and all this kind of stuff. And it was just flat out Jacob's Ladder. As you can kind of see here. And they, instead of trying to reproduce Vietnam in the rainforests of Puerto Rico, they tried to recreate it in the rainforests of Vancouver during the winter. Hey, you know what? Whatever you can do. Vibe is what matters. And of course, Haley Joel Osment of The Sixth Sense was the guest star in this episode. Yes. So this is just flat out Jacob's Ladder, straight up, just X-Files style. Absolutely blatant, with Skinner as Jacob Singer, right? There you go. Now, another influence that people have said that Jacob's Ladder is on the Silent Hill franchise. We've done a lot of work on Silent Hill on the Frasier blogs because it's just filled with phraserology. I don't see it. I don't see the influence of Jacob's Ladder on that. Maybe in the games, but I was watching some of the gameplay, and I don't really see it. I think that's kind of a reach, but I just wanted to bring that up because people do mention that. David Lynch. So yes, I've been mentioning David Lynch throughout this presentation. I really believe that he was very heavily influenced by Jacob's Ladder. I think it had a decisive. I think that everything Lynch did after Jacob's Ladder, because don't forget that Wild at Heart sort of came out a few months earlier than Jacob's Ladder in 1990. I think everything after was very, very heavily influenced. Like I said, Fire Walk with Me, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, obviously, Inland Empire, and then also Twin Peaks: The Return. I think that the whole idea of the shifting realities of these bardos, let's just say, of these liminal states, of these interior realities, if you prefer, I think it comes straight from Jacob's Ladder. I haven't seen. I was looking and I hadn't seen Lynch sort of mention that, but I don't know. I just got to put it down to the timing of it. I think that he was very heavily influenced by it. So somebody else has picked up on this as well. Jacob's Ladder is a twisted, dark tale about a war veteran trying to get his life back on track. He's a postal worker who is coping with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Don't forget, this is before the whole going postal meme really spread. He has to overcome PTSD, but also to deal with depressing past memories such as the death of his child. In addition, he is having nightmarish delusions and hallucinations. He believes he is the victim of a secret army experiment and that there is a conspiracy. As soon as he embarks on a spiritual journey to find the truth, his life becomes a living hell. Right. And moreover, it is a disturbing and bleak portrait of a mentally unstable character who suffers from symptoms of schizophrenia, anxiety, and manic depression. Tim Robbins delivers an outstanding performance as a mentally ill war veteran who is unable to cope with life's challenges. This mad reality looks a lot like the twisted world of David Lynch's Eraserhead. Not really. Not really. It is a dark story with repulsive characters, horrifying scenes, and disturbing images of deformed people. Well, that's a lot of David Lynch's stuff, right? Inland Empire, for starters. This dreamlike world also stands out as a close examination of the subconscious, so Jacob's Ladder looks a lot like a darker version of Lynch's masterpiece, Mulholland Drive. That is a better comparison than Eraserhead. I mean, some of the grotesquerie I think you can sort of compare to Eraserhead, but Eraserhead is clearly drawing on German Expressionism of the 20s and 30s. So, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, but I really, very seriously believe that Lynch was very heavily influenced by Jacob's Ladder. He's never caught up to it, or at least that I can find. If he has, and you've read about it, please let me know. Now, why did I watch this movie 200 times? Maybe not quite 200, but definitely more than 100. Why did I watch this movie as often as I have? Well, that's an excellent question. A lot of it just really resonated with me on a lot of different levels. You know, I talked about Macaulay Culkin being just basically a lookalike for my son at the time. I've got a little list here. I was spending a lot of time on New York subways at the time. I still have dreams about New York subways to this day, even though it's been almost 30 years since I was working in Manhattan. But, even when I was in my early days of freelancing, New York subways were just, I was in New York pretty much like all the time. I mean, I'd sleep over on Friday nights and so on. My whole, New York was kind of my life, and I did a lot of walking around New York. So I was kind of just getting that. And don't forget, this is early 90s. This is in the middle of the crack epidemic, which is, almost as dark as the early 70s were. The vibes from the films like The Exorcist, the 70s movies that had a huge influence on me. My uncle, as you heard me mention before, was in Vietnam. He actually quit college to enlist. He was kind of thinking like maybe he was a bit of an adrenaline junkie. He quit. He was in college. He had a deferment. He was in Boston University. He quit enlisted in the Marines and signed up to be an evac pilot. So like the evac scenes that we see a lot, obviously. That's what he did. Kind of crazy. And his son, my cousin, became, if you've ever seen the movie The Perfect Storm, those storm jumping. And I felt like the biggest pussy in the world when I found that out. Anyhow, and in 1990, I don't know if I think I hadn't seen Jacob's Ladder. I saw it on video, so it might have been a month or two before I saw Jacob's Ladder, but I had a bad trip in New York, and I ended up in the hospital from having a bad trip. So that's pretty Jacob's Ladder, right? You probably heard me talk about how I was dosed with angel dust when I was smoking a joint, kind of like what we see in the beginning of the film. You probably heard me talk a lot about hallucinations that I would, like I said, I'd get these fevers, 105, 106. It was very common, and I didn't discover until later on how deadly that was, right? Oh, yeah. So I'd hallucinate all the time. You've heard me talk about the... just close this out here. You've heard me talk about the leprechaun. This is a photo collage on the left here. When I woke up and I saw this little leprechaun who was a lot more hideous than this and almost moved like a puppet. But the dining room had become this infinite landscape with this purple lightning and so on, and this leprechaun is screaming at me in Gaelic, I don't know, some language I didn't recognize, and then the ceiling opens and all these coins start falling from the ceiling. That wasn't by no means my only hallucination when I was young, but that was possibly the most memorable. This collage that I did here on the right, this is a self-portrait. I had a really fucked up childhood, like really, really fucked up. Fucked up. Yeah, like I said, I was in the hospital a lot. So I was in the hospital like in that early 70s a lot, so I sort of, I don't know, I just like so much of that film just kind of like it just vibed with me because it just sort of hit a lot of the bases of my own experiences in life. This is, there's the lightning. The lightning was like this weird motif in a lot of dreams and hallucinations that I had. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Maybe some of you might have an idea about that, but I made this this collage here. I had a really bad flashback experience in 1985. And I just, like, I woke up screaming for like 10 minutes. My wife, she was my girlfriend at the time. She couldn't calm me down. And I made this to sort of commemorate that experience. Really just horrible experience. But just had a lot of fucked up, horrible experiences. So, we don't need to go into that. But again, this is part of why this film just really just resonated with me on so many different levels. I just really felt like I could relate to the character and I could relate to the story, which tells you a lot about my life. So I'll just read. This is from the Post, and I also put this in the Endless American Midnight. When I was 12, I got a particularly serious ear infection, was bedridden for over 2 weeks. Actually, I was couch-ridden. I was so weak that I couldn't walk up and down the stairs. If I wasn't so incredibly sick, it would have been paradise. Nothing to do but lie around and read comics. I was a big Captain America fan at the time, and I was reading about 3 years' worth of the title during that episode. One night during the illness, I woke to a most peculiar tableau. A leprechaun was sitting on a rock in the middle of the living room, and there was a thunderstorm flashing in the adjacent room. I call him a leprechaun only because he was small and bearded and wearing archaic clothes and a rope belt. I later found out that, that experience I had was very similar to experiences people reported in my same area with a creature called the Pukwudgie, okay? And that goes back to Indian times. Of course, I've got a lot of Indian blood in me, so maybe, I don't know, maybe it was genetic memory or something. But it didn't seem cute and charming. He seemed scary as hell. He was shouting over the noise of the storm in a language I didn't understand, maybe Gaelic. At some point, the ceiling opened up and gold coins rained from the ceiling. The noise was unbearable, and I passed out. Again, not by no means the only hallucination that I experienced, but certainly the most memorable and very vivid, very, very vivid. It happened, is what I've always said. I'm not saying that it happened in this physical reality. Maybe I just kind of crossed over into another reality. I don't know. When I told Graham Hancock that story, he was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, that's, it's like, your fevers trip that DMT switch. Again, and getting back to the pineal gland in Jacob's Ladder, right? So similar symbolism there. So there we go, Jacob's Ladder. Yeah, and there's that creepy woman on the subway. Yes. Like I said, I still, to this day, have dreams about the New York City subways. I don't know what that says about me, but there you go. All right, so I've been talking for 2 hours now, so I'm going to just see what you guys are up to. Hope I didn't lose everybody. Okay. All right, let me, let's see. How you doing out there? Live chat. Top chat. Right, let's go to live chat. There we go. Oh, thank you, Akigini. Interesting that Bardo sounds like Barza in Arabic, which is the place the place after death in Islam. People conscripted into the war going with hardened veterans of guerrilla warfare. Some of the stuff the Viet Cong came up with had a Looney Tunes quality to it. Yes, it was messed up. Messed up. Every culture has myths of the little people. However, Celtic and Native are two biggies, so maybe you got a double whammy. I think so, yeah. It sounds that way. Oh, that scene with the thalidomide. Oh, thank you for reminding me about that, Janet. So, like I said, I was in the hospital a lot my first 10 years of my life. A lot. I was in the hospital a lot. It was this horrific dystopian hellhole called Quincy City Hospital, as everybody used to call it, Quincy Shitty Hospital. It was a dump. Had some really horrific experiences there. I remember the last time I was there, I was in the children's ward. I remember like almost every moment of being in that ward, like I was just so hyper alert. But the candy stripers, the nurses' aides, some of the nurses' aides had thalidomide, where they were like thalidomide babies, and they had these deformities, and it was really, really, really upsetting because I was really sick. I'm in the oxygen tent and all this kind of stuff and getting all these therapies with masks and so on, and I hated sleeping in those goddamn oxygen tents. And 2 or 3 times a day, these girls would come in, these poor girls. I felt, today I feel terribly sorry for them. I remember one had like this shriveled arm and such, and it was because of thalidomide. And these are like teenage girls with these deformities. I think that's another thing that, again, so much of Jacob's Ladder just seems to be like encapsulations of my own experiences. And I kind of wonder how many, other people had similar experiences and so on. But yeah, the thalidomide babies, that was really upsetting. So if you don't know what thalidomide is, any younger people, it was a drug that they'd give women for morning sickness in the 50s. And unfortunately, it caused horrific deformities, birth defects, and so on. Yeah. One of the reasons why I didn't take the S. Good for you. Good for you. Okay. What do we got going on here? Yes, sir. I miss Tracy. Would love to have heard her takes on the shit show of the past few years. Well, you can probably, I mean, if you're familiar with her work, I'm sure you can sort of imagine. Banana Cedar. Yes, with the sissy bar. Yeah. Those are the days, man. Those are the days. All right. So let's safe and effective until it wasn't. Absolutely. So I'm opening the floor to questions. So if you haven't seen Jacob's Ladder, again, it's not an easy watch, but it is a must-see. And it's a very, very deeply spiritual movie. It's so interesting because before Hollywood just went insane in the past 5 or 10 years, you'd have movies that would deal with the religious topics in sober and serious ways. I mean, Jacob's Ladder is one of them. Another one of my favorite movies, The Rapture, with David Duchovny and Mimi Rogers. You're gonna laugh when I say this, but I mean, I fully understand it's not a great film. But The Seventh Sign with Demi Moore is another film. Is it Aidan Quinn? No, maybe it's not Aidan Quinn. Who plays the husband? Maybe it is Aidan Quinn. And Jürgen Prochnow playing Jesus. It's interesting, when there was still kind of a basic religious understanding in this country, in this culture, that even Hollywood could do serious and well-researched or well-read depictions of, for instance, Purgatory or The Exorcist or, other things like that. Even horror movies could do that. We've just become so degraded as a culture in the past 20 to 30 years that we just can't do that anymore. But I would argue that The Jacob's Ladder is a very serious spiritual or religious film. And, I feel the same way about things like the X-Files and Millennium. And, we talked last week about Requiem and A Dark Song. We talked about, I think that there is a way to deal with religious or mystical or spiritual issues without being didactic, without being preachy, without being chauvinistic. I still think that there is a lot of room to express these ideas, and in ways that I think you can tell these stories and put across these ideas, maybe to people who are, understandably turned off by, the religious discourse in this country. Too much of which has been degraded, I would argue, by boomer evangelicalism. That evangelicalism, I think, has cheapened religious discourse in many ways. And I have friends and family members who are evangelicals, and I don't, most of them are much more serious than a lot of the junk that's out there. But unfortunately, the junk that's out there is the stuff that people tend to notice. And it has, never mind crap like prosperity gospel, which is just, don't even get me started on it. The actress I mentioned in the X-Files, one that looked like Elizabeth Pena, she was one of the big stars of the Americans. That is right. Thank you for bringing that up, Janet. University students can't understand Old Lit anymore because they don't get the biblical references anymore. Yeah, I mean, this was part of the culture, It's part of the culture. Yes, Annette Mahendru. Very good actress, and very clearly seems to me like Chris Carter was just trying to hit some of those Elizabeth Pena. It's such a goddamn shame about her. She was just really something special. I just totally fell in love with her in that movie, and she just kind of fell apart, and it was alcoholism, which is kind of interesting to me. But, very, very tragic. Kind of makes me wonder if she had some trauma issues she was dealing with from childhood. But just phenomenal. Mahendru, Indian Russian, that's correct. That is correct. That is absolutely right. I started watching The Americans, and I really liked it, and I don't know what happened. I don't know why I stopped watching it. I think I just kind of felt kind of intimidated by it because it just seemed like a huge investment. Me and Mrs. Wibble, we got to start doing some watching again. We got that big TV downstairs, and we get this whole Google box, I don't know, something like that. We got to get back into watching all this stuff because I don't know. There's a lot of stuff I need to watch and sort of replenish my cultural batteries. I've always thought if the people who wrote the Bible and other religious texts claim it's divinely inspired, then who's to say novels, movies, TV shows, and music can't be spiritually divinely inspired? Not me. I'd never say that. I think, yeah, wait, you're talking to Mr. Mr. Elizabeth Fraser here, I absolutely believe that. Show about spies, I'm there. Yeah, right on. I'm totally about, good espionage stuff I love. I just love the gamesmanship and the puzzle of it. Oh, man. Yes, sirree. Okay. So let me ask you a question. I mean, how many people out there have not seen Jacob's Ladder? I'd be curious to see how many of you have not seen it. But, yeah, like I said, I just, I would watch that movie. This is the days of VHS. I'd rewind it and watch it again. At least once. Sometimes twice. I was just, yeah. I was the same way with, interestingly enough, I was the same way with Apocalypse Now, too, because I'm of that age, and I remember when, I sort of became aware too young. I sort of just, because of things going on in my life, I just sort of became a little too hyper-vigilant, too young. And I remember I was very aware of Vietnam, obviously because my uncle was there, and right in the middle of the shit every day, flying medical evac helicopters and so on. And it's interesting too because he was a wild man before he went to Vietnam, and he came back and he was very, very different. It really, really changed him, and I'm sure he just saw a lot of shit that just completely changed his outlook on the world. Let's see. Stuff on TV may be inspired, but it's not the divine. No, it's inspired by, I think, the folks downstairs these days. Absolutely. And quite openly so. Every time, when I think of television, particularly television now, and I remember, So a few years ago, we're at my son's apartment, and he and his, my kids are, and his wife, they're all huge Patriots fans. And it was the Patriots playing somebody, and it was one of the worst football games I've ever watched in my life. But afterwards, there was like one of these kind of like game shows, something going on. And every time I watch anything like Masked Singer or Masked Dancer or any of these kind of game shows or whatever, any of this bullshit on television, all I can think of is like Requiem for a Dream. I'm going to be on television. I mean, the whole thing with like her hallucination about the television show. That's how I see network television today. Like, that's how it comes across. Like, maybe it's the influence of that film, but I can't get that out of my head when I see these just dystopian, nightmarish, hellish, like literally hellish things. Like I said, Masked Singer and Masked Dancer are kind of like my go-to examples for that, but by no means alone. It's hell. It's hellish. Been meaning to see it since I first heard it referenced in a song by horrorcore group Gravediggers. Never got around to it. Well, get around to it. Just rewatched it before the stream. Outstanding. Gonna watch it tonight, I think. Still finishing Requiem. Need to watch a Dark Song. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing, too, so I guess Requiem has a little bit darker, I mean, depending on how you choose to interpret it. I mean, it has a bit darker kind of what is it? What is the term I'm looking for? Resolution, I guess. I was going to say conflict resolution, but that's not the right word. And I love the ending of Dark Song. I just think it's just so beautiful and inspiring. And, it's arguable, too, that, Jacob's Ladder ends on a grace note. I mean, of course he dies, but, he's been through purgatory and he's been through the bardo. However you choose to, and what we're really talking about is just two different terms for the same thing. This is a thing that kind of I've been thinking a lot about, I mean, so much that we discuss in religion or whatever, it just gets hung up on these terms, like terminology, like these just word games, So, I mean, is the bardo and purgatory ultimately the same thing? Well, I guess in purgatory, you sort of go on to your eternal reward, and in the bardo, you go on to your next incarnation. But, I don't know. I think it's something to really think about, I think it's really something to consider. But this is the great thing about mysticism, all right? I'm going to put a little plug for mysticism, is that mystics can act almost like as interlocutors between all these different traditions, because mystics can see the underlying reality behind all the different expressions, religious expressions, however you choose to see it. As a mystic, you can phase like in and out, because you understand the experience that drives this system or that system. You know what I'm saying? So I think there's really something to be said for mysticism, particularly in these days, in these very fraught and conflict-filled But this, it's interesting too, because Jacob's Ladder, I can just watch it. It really is like listening to an album for me. It's like, oh, I haven't listened to Sgt. Pepper. I mean, I never listened to Sgt. Pepper. Just, it's like that kind of thing. It's like, oh, I haven't listened to Sgt. Pepper lately, man. Just throw that on. And it's like, that's the way I feel about movies like Jacob's Ladder. I can just throw it on. And even though I've watched it, let's just say over 100 times, it doesn't matter, because I still get the same experience out of it in the same way that I get that same experience from listening to an album that I really love. You know, instead of Sgt. Pepper, I should have said the Pinko Pig, but or Heaven in Las Vegas. Actually, I don't even listen to Heaven in Las Vegas that much. I this is gonna sound heretical, but that is not my favorite album of theirs by any stretch of the imagination. Actually, it's kind of a little bit low on the list. I mean, great album. Always enjoy listening to it, but to me, it's just too. It's just a little too placid for me. It doesn't have that. I don't know. I don't know how to put it. You know, it's the same way I feel, you know, with like London Calling. Like, that's an album for like people who don't really like that band, you know. It's just, and it's an album that nobody made a big deal of until Rolling Stone named it like the top album of the 80s back in 1989. A says, I saw it one time as a teen, recalled it quite well enough for this because it's stuck in my mind, made an impression. Yeah, it definitely makes an impression. It's not a movie that you can be neutral about. It demands, you know, you react to it. But it's interesting because I was doing and I used to appear on this podcast about the TV show Millennium. And the thing I said about Millennium is that Millennium is like, it's hard to love, you know. It's very confrontational, it's very caustic, it's very dark and heavy and doesn't want you to just enjoy it, you know. And one couldn't make the same argument about Jacob's Ladder, but I just don't feel maybe it, again, is it because it just seems to resonate with me on so many of these personal levels and sort of resonate with me on these experiences that I've had, you know, being in the hospital after a bad trip, right? That was a big one. And like I said, that was maybe a month or two before I saw the movie on VHS. So I don't know, man. Really, it's funny too. Like when that kind of happens, like when something just hits you out of the blue, but really seems to speak to you, like really seems to be speaking to you on a level that you can't rationalize, that you can't even justify. It just is. And that's really what this film is for me. It's on the short list now due to the fantastic imagery you shared from it. Yeah, you will dig it, dude. Believe me, you will feel it. You will definitely feel it. All right, let me just go back. You know, I'm actually going to refresh this. Give me just one moment here. So this is not. I don't. Was I planning to do this? I don't know. I just sort of. It struck me out of the blue that I should do. And what was I thinking about? What was I processing that I kind of felt like I needed to do this now? I don't know. I'll probably remember as soon as the stream ends. But something was going through my head that I was like, okay, now, you know, I mean, I wanted to do a horror movie for October. Just trying to think. I don't know. I don't remember. But this is a big one for me, and it really is. I'm just trying to think of anything that kind of hit me on this level, like this. You know, I can't really think of too many things that just kind of hit me on this, like, oh, this is kind of like speaking to my experiences. You know, I mean, obviously, not literally, or not fully. It's more of an impressionistic kind of thing. But like I said, I mean, having dealt with hallucination, like through a large part of my childhood, I mean, I'd also have super vivid nightmares, which I've also written about. So I was kind of having like these super vivid nightmares, but also these hallucinations. So it's like dealing with films like this or with David Lynch or whatever, it feels very familiar to me. Like I understand the methodology at work. I understand like the language, having sort of spent a lot of my life, right, in this kind of twilight zone between reality and dream. I don't even know how to put it. But I also think like I said, I mean, people say, well, how do you end up having all these crazy dreams? Well, I think a lot of it is due to the hypnagogic work, because you really train your brain to sort of exist in that twilight zone between dream and consensus reality. Oh, watching it on acid. Ooh, not what I would recommend. Oh, I don't think I would. The movie already feels like an acid trip enough as it is, right? I don't think I would recommend that experience to anyone, But, hey, if you survived and maybe got something out of it, more power to you. Alrighty then. I'm going to wrap this one up. I'm resisting my, like my OCD thing to like, oh, well, it's 12:31. We've got to go to 1. I talk a lot about the OCD. And maybe like watching a movie over 100 times is kind of a symptom of that. But it's like I've kind of gotten better at like dealing, with like the intrusive thoughts and everything that kind of fire it, or dealing with like the stressors or whatever. It's like instead of like, oh, I've got to, since I've been dealing with it for so long, rather than just going, oh, I've just got to like lapse into my rituals or my habits or my patterns. It's like, well, why not just sort of deal with a stressor or, the intrusive thoughts? I mean, whatever it is, it's kind of driving this. Because really, like, all the kind of compulsive stuff doesn't really, it doesn't solve the problem. You know what I mean? And it can be like a major waste of time. Jacob's Ladder is a great movie, but watching it as much as I have probably isn't the best use of my time. Oh my God. Whatever. Oh, good Lord. It's interesting too because talking about the American Indian or Native or whatever the terminology you're supposed to use. So I've known for a while, well, a long while, that my great grandfather on my mother's side, her father's father was native, and he had been adopted by a white family during that whole era when they were just sort of grabbing kids from these tribes and throwing them into these orphanages. And he actually became a very successful sign painter back in the day. And, you know, there's that whole thing that natives don't have, like, fear of heights. I wonder if that sort of played into that. But he was a very successful sign painter back when, you know, those billboards would be painted by hand. And my mother always thought that that's where my artistic talent came from. But I mean, it turns out that my dad has native some sort of native lineage on his paternal side. You know, so like the Y DNA side, which isn't surprising because, you know, my family, or the family on that side, came here at 1630, and I kind of think they were pirates. You know, based on what I've read about them, I think that is about, the Indians were all genocided and everything like that. It's like, well, there was a tremendous amount of intermarriage that has sort of been written out of history. Particularly like in Massachusetts during like colonial times and everything. And so I'm not surprised that, you know, you have a bunch of pirates coming over from the British Isles, and they don't want to deal with these uptight, hatchet-faced Puritan women, so they take up with native women. So that's probably where that influence comes from. But I think that's what gives, like, you know, it's different now because of all the immigration and stuff. But I think when you think about like the classic American look and why it's different from like Northern Europeans or whatever, or Europeans in general, I think it's that admixture. We have a lot of Native American intermarriage, and also, you know, black intermarriage, racial superiority, and all this kind of nonsense. I think that I think it's something that was done as a matter of course. And, you know, also this is just totally random, but back in, you know, particularly in Massachusetts, they had, you know, Indian schools where a lot of the native tribes would be like sent to these schools and you know, taught English and math and the Bible and so on. And I think a lot of those people just ended up intermarrying. So anyway, this is just, you know, what Banner Traditionalist had said about the Pukwudgie. So there you go. Oh, come on, really? Oh, why does it do this? Asphodite, 12:30. We're past that now. I'll, you know, since it's a 50, I'll go to 12:45. 9 is a clean number. Thank you, Janet. Happy Halloween to you too. Just so you know, Halloween. My wife and I thought we were being clever back in the day by getting married on Halloween, and then we regretted it when we had kids, because we could never celebrate our anniversary. You know, we had to take the kids trick-or-treating and whatnot. So now we can go back to celebrating our anniversary. We kind of outsmarted ourselves, you know, by getting married on Halloween. Europeans look very different in other countries too. Americans have mushed up genes. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. All right. Okay. Jacob's Ladder and Serpent in the Rainbow always felt like companion pieces to me, if that makes sense. It does make sense. It does make sense. Jimbo, Millennium, especially the first season, was unrelentingly dark and humorless, but still quite riveting and unforgettable. Yes, very much so. The whole concept behind Millennium was, Chris Carter wanted to do his spin on Seven. It was very dark and hard to watch, but there you go. There you go. Going to take it up to 12:45. If anybody's got any last minute contributions to make. It's interesting too, because like my family, well, I think like religion has a lot to do with it, but they don't like talking about genealogy and stuff, because I don't know, it's like my mother says it's not where you came from, it's where you're going, and she's always trying to push the whole evangelical thing on me, but like religion and the church were always just like really strong focuses in my family, all along, and and even to this day. So I think that like ethnicity and genealogy is seen as just is irrelevant, because the whole idea is coming out of the nations, the ecclesia, coming out of the nations and forming a new nation under the banner of the church and so on. Thank you very much, Janet. Appreciate that very, very much. Thank you very much. Okay. I don't know what, I don't know if, they're both a lot older now, but Bruce Joel Rubin and Adrian Lyne, I don't think they've really done much recently. But like I said, I'm not particularly big fan of Adrian Lyne's sort of, Fatal Attraction, all that stuff. I mean, I watched all that stuff and I enjoyed it, but it's just, to me, it just seemed a little fluffy, a little, just like a little too Showtime or whatever. And like I said, a lot of Bruce Joel, Brainstorm, Ghost. I even liked My Life with Michael Keaton. I liked that movie a lot. Everybody thought it was mawkish and kind of saccharine, but I really enjoyed it. Deep Impact, I liked quite a bit. He's ghostwritten some other things, like he's, worked on, like script doctoring and so on. But, and like I said, I mean, what I've always said, particularly after reading the screenplays, you really have to give Adrian Lyne major props for his influence on this picture, because as much as I like Rubin's work, I can't really say that his original screenplay is all that hot. I was really disappointed when I read it. It just seemed just like way too Hollywood. All right, I'm going to wrap this up in a couple minutes. Why is that up there? Oh, okay, I get it. Thank you, Veneer Traditionalists. Appreciate that. Good night to you, too. Good night to you, too. Lucas Dog says hello. Hello, Lucas Dog. I'm hungry now. Somebody's talking about steak. I could use some steak right now. Oh, man. Good night. Thank you, Besnan. Appreciate that greatly. Thank you. As always. As always. All right, I'm going to end this now. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining in.